Today's sermon title is probably a little bit alarming to people, and it was to myself even when I thought of it, and even to Kathleen as she drove away from the church one day this week with her grandparents and saw the sign out front, and she said, "Oh God, we better start packing our stuff." But I've probably done some worse things since I've been here other than this sermon title, and I'm still here. So I'm going to take the risk of it. You might wonder how I got to it, but if you read along with me today, maybe it came to you already. I have to be honest that when I read about Jesus cleansing the 10 lepers, and it's not a story that really typically sticks out to a lot of us that we recall very often. It's not one of the more well-known stories about Jesus. I am as human as anybody else, and the first thing I thought about those 9 was ungrateful bastards. That actually popped into my head. It's a little harsh, but that's what I thought. In a joking way, in a lighthearted way, but still those were the words, and not bastards in the definition of like a child without a father, but the other one that's in the dictionary about just being a mean person. And if you notice, it's because they came to Jesus. They didn't even approach him, and they just said, "Heal us," and he did, and they showed no gratitude whatsoever. I'm sure that in our lives we've experienced that same feeling. In this sermon today, it's more questions that I will ask and put forth to you and allow you to answer in your own hearts and minds. And this kind of follows the style of some of the teaching I've learned in seminary about a man named Soren Kierkegaard. He's been dead a long, long time, and he is a very well-known man in those circles, a philosopher and a theologian, and has some really, really good thoughts on the way church and worship ought to be. In Soren's model, the church worship service changed, and many churches changed after he presented this. Some did and now have gone back to other ways, but in his model of worship, I'm merely a mediator in a conversation between the church and Jesus, or in God. Jesus is also a mediator that allows that conversation to take place, but though we're set up like this is not a stage in a way. It's just a place where us who kind of prompt the feelings and the thoughts stand, those who sing and those who read scripture or play music. And you're not the audience. Does anybody want to guess who the audience today really is? Anybody want to say it? I know you know. Heather, go ahead.
God.
God is our audience. So the seating looks like you are. We're all part of this conversation today. All your voices, thoughts, and feelings are offering, I hope, praise and thoughts towards God, who we're really here to please. So though I get to stand up here and perform in a way, that's not really what's going on, and it's never my intention. It's that we all are found pleasing to God in our worship. So often people compliment or criticize my sermons, and I appreciate that, but in all honesty, in the end, what matters is how God makes me feel inside about what was just said. Although I will take all the compliments you give. Because sometimes it is hard to tell if things are really happening. But back to the ungrateful bastards, which is kind of fun to say in a way, especially up here. I haven't talked that way in a while, but I'd ask you to think about who in your lives is like that. Now you might have to change some of the words. Maybe you'll say brats instead of bastards. Maybe you'll say punks or whatever, I don't know. Or other words even worse than the B word I'm using, but who in your lives is like that? Is it sometimes your kids when they talk back to you? Is it sometimes your boss or your co-workers or other family members? Is it church members? Is it me at times that you might think that about? Maybe, just maybe, someone has thought that about each of us. And like the lepers, we didn't even know they were thinking about us or even care at the moment because we had other things on our mind. So there's some points I'd like to make as we go through the scripture, and I've kind of taken it in the order of the way the story is told. And the first one is that these lepers, as Jesus entered the village, it says they approached him, yet they kept their distance. So they only approached, but so close to Jesus. Was it that they didn't want Jesus to receive the disease they had, or was it that they were afraid? I don't know, but I'll bet that as each of us approach Jesus, we experience those same feelings at times. Maybe we want Jesus to be there for us, but we're not quite sure if he will be, or if we even have earned the right to talk to them. But I can tell you that you have, just by your very creation. They yelled out for him for help, but they didn't offer him anything in return. They didn't praise Jesus. They didn't give him a lot of glory. They didn't offer him money. They didn't say, we'll do good for the poor. They didn't say anything. They just said, heal us. They did call him master, which I guess would be a form of praise, but that was the limit of it. They simply had faith that he would heal them. And for that to occur, that was all that was required to be made clean. Where do you see that kind of faith in your life? Where do you show that faith in your life? Where is it where you simply have faith? Not trying to do enough to be pleasing in God's eyes, although that's always good, but just expecting that God is there regardless of what you're doing or have done or who around you acts a certain way. Why do you keep a distance from Jesus when you do? We all do those things, myself at times even. I'd be dishonest if I didn't admit that there were times where I went to Jesus and I really did so in a reluctant way because I was ashamed of something or didn't know how to handle something or regretted an action of mine. We all experience those things. Often I've helped people recently who have different struggles in their life, and they just don't feel good enough to go to God or come into church. We've all maybe experienced that for different reasons. And I would hope that whatever little bit I do when I speak to them assures them that you are always good enough to be here in this place. Why do you draw close to God and to Jesus when you do? Sometimes you probably feel closer than you do at others. I don't know the answer to that either, but I've experienced it along with you. Do we sometimes go to Jesus like these lepers as a matter of convenience, although I wouldn't say leprosy is a mere inconvenience, but is it when we need something where we approach him and when things are going on cruise control in our lives, we don't remember to be grateful as the one out of the 10 was? Or is our going to Jesus a matter of our daily life, our daily routine, and what we experience every day? I'm not talking about just praying either, although prayer is an important part of our life. I'm talking about, do we go to be in his presence by walking in Jesus' ways and doing his will on this earth? Another point I'd like to make is that Jesus merely saw them and sent them on their way. He didn't call them closer. He didn't bless them with oil as I've done for people here in the past. He didn't baptize them. He didn't tell them what to do. He just sent them on their way. He didn't even tell them you are now healed. He just said, go to the priest. They got healed along the way. Not in that moment or that encounter with Jesus, but on their way to the priest was when it occurred. Healing and Jesus working us and for us isn't always, in fact, it's rarely some magical moment that strikes us down or just washes over us immediately. I've found in my life that Jesus' work in my life and healing of wounds is an ongoing and progressing work. But somehow, although it seems impatient, or I feel impatient at times, before we know it, we are clean again or healed. It's not as if one day the doctor walks in and says, the cancer was here yesterday and now it's completely gone today. There's a lot of work that goes on in that process, and that draws us closer to those we love and to God when that healing occurs. And if that healing doesn't occur for us here on earth, we know that it does in paradise. But as it happens with the lepers, as we go on these journeys, and it's not about a magic wand with the smoke and mirrors and an immediate healing like we see so often on TV. And I'm not saying that that isn't possible with God. It's certainly possible, and I'm sure it occurs at times. But generally, that is not my common experience with God. But what is my common experience is, like Noah and so many others in the Bible, when I go through that process, I'm better off than I was when we first ran into Jesus. I'm thinking now, actually, although it's not written down, about Frances' words to me today, that after the hard work of therapy, she's stronger than she was before, even at 102. But we have to go in the way that he has sent us for that to happen. The lepers did what Jesus said. He said, go to the priests, and they did. They did respond to him and follow his instructions. They didn't run away and go the other way. So though they were a little bit ungrateful, the 9 of them, they still at least followed his instructions and went on the way that Jesus sent them, as we try to do in our lives as well. One of the other questions that struck me, and that I would have wrote about if I was critiquing this scripture for a paper, was, why did he send them to the priests? Was it to convert the priests? Was he showing off a little bit to show what he could do? Or was there some other reason about who might see them on their journey to the priests that we're not even told about? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure if that matters or not, because for me, that part deals with the idea of our healing and our cleansing being a journey sometimes and not just a specific moment. But others may know or feel or see a reason of why he sent them to the priests. Of course, I'm thinking these priests were probably critics of Jesus, and so part of me might think that they might have been a little bit ungrateful things as themselves, and maybe he just wanted to show them exactly what could be done by simple faith. The other point, as we've already mentioned, is that only one turned back. He healed 10, but only one came back to him, as they noticed they were healed along the way. Only one thought to return to Jesus and be thankful. But he was more than thankful. He was grateful. He prostrated himself according to the scripture. What that means is that he laid down at Jesus' feet. He didn't shake his hand. He didn't hug him. He didn't give him a high five or a thumbs up like I like to do sometimes, or often. I do that a lot. He laid down at Jesus' feet in gratitude and praised him. Anytime you see the word prostrated in the Bible, that's what's going on. That is more than just gratitude. That is complete submission to the person who he called master. He was a person also who was a Samaritan. So here's a Samaritan, not a Jewish person, a foreigner who most people didn't want around and thought of as ill, and thought of with, ways we might treat other foreigners in our lives at times. It's nothing new. This has occurred since the creation of man, that foreigners weren't always welcome. This man was a foreigner, and yet thought and knew, and wasn't even in Jesus' faith, to prostrate himself before the Messiah. Yet he was the only one also of those who I'm thinking were not Samaritans, because they specifically mentioned that this one was willing to put himself beneath Jesus and to show him gratitude. I think that part is especially relevant in our world today. Though I can't sort out the politics of foreigners and immigration any better than anyone else, and I'm bothered by many of the same things other people are, I do know and have seen the gratitude a person who is new to a community feels when they are accepted and loved as one of their own. Those of you who have moved into this town or this area have probably experienced that as well. This place is kind of a tough nut to crack into. I talk to many people, and I have the advantage, believe it or not, of being a guy who grew up here. So I get accepted a little more easily than some other people. They know me or my parents, but I know folks who have lived here for 20, 30 years and are still treated as outsiders, even more so than I have, and I was gone for 20 years. It's a question I think we should ask ourselves, especially when we wonder why nothing changes. Well, it can't change if we don't allow it to, even in our community. Another question, we're almost at the end, is that none of them was Jesus' words. It says, was none of them found to return and give praise. Those were Jesus' words. He asked that question, what happened to the other 9? Was none of them found to return and give praise, except for the foreigner? Think about those words for a second. What stuck with me was the word found. And I thought immediately of my favorite hymn, Amazing Grace. I once was lost, but now I am found. I was blind, but now I see. The lepers weren't blind, they had a skin disease, but they were healed in the same way that a blind person who could now see could be. There's a difference between just being healed and being found again. When we are healed, when our blindness is removed and we see, when we sing that song, Amazing Grace, and think about it as I know so many of us do we truly return to give praise in our words and our actions? Do we truly let those words sink in and change our lives,